Hello everybody, Kagamin here, also known as Vance Miller, and today I have a very special discussion video and review for all of you. Today we'll be discussing the 80th anniversary Thomas and Friends Motorized Classic Flying Scotsman released by Mattel. Now, this item is very special, but it's also special for the reason that it was a surprise gift from my wonderful, amazing girlfriend, Toyin. It was just something so unexpected, and it made me so happy because she knows how much I love the Thomas and Friends franchise, and she knows how much I wanted to collect these brand new line of toys. So, to Toyin, thank you very much, and to the audience, you might as well thank her as well, because this video would not be possible without her. And without any further ado, let's just jump immediately into the in-hand appraisal and the rest of the video. Okay guys, so welcome to the in-hand appraisal part of the video. Now this is going to be an unscripted video, so please excuse any jumping around or whatever. I'm going to try my best to make it really clean in the edit. But here we have a look at Flying Scotsman's packaging. As you can see, there he is. You know, we got the two tenders, the L and the R, the classic Flying Scotsman little nameplate. We have the false side rods right here, his actual side rods, and then we have his name written across the front. We got here in another language, we got the 80th anniversary logo, and of course the classic Fisher-Price Thomas the Tank Engine logo that we're also familiar with. At the top of the box, we have a CGI promo of the Flying Scotsman. You know, there he is with his eyebrows and his nose. Very, very big face, which, you know, him and Gordon are alike in that sense, since they are brothers, after all. And same thing goes on the side. I really, really like this box design, although I do have some issues with it, which I'm going to get into in a second. If we turn the box around, as you can see, there's a bunch of licensing info. Same goes for the bottom. Now, here's my first issue with the box. This licensing info could easily just be on this side of the item, just on the bottom. There's no real need for any of this to be on the back, because I've looked over it several times since receiving this item, and I've realized that, you know, it just is a better use of space if they put it all down here and use the back for another purpose. For example, in the original Trackmaster, and as well as Take Along a Wooden Railway, the back of the box would have either information about the character, like a little character bio, a little picture of the character with a fun fact, or in the case of Classic Trackmaster, as I remember it, they had pictures of the other characters you can get in the range, so it would encourage you to buy more characters, buy more 3-packs, buy more sets, to have a full toy railway. But this box, it doesn't really encourage you to do anything. You know, you got the Flying Scotsman, you got the Thomas and Friends logo, of course, and you know, you got all the classic hallmarks, you got the Motorized over here, but there's no characters on the back, other characters you can collect. And this is a very big gripe for me, because, you know, the appeal of the Trackmaster range is, you know, having these motorized engines, all these characters, reenacting the episodes, because, you know, the characters can move on their own, and not having other characters on the back that you could select from and, you know, cross off when you eventually do collect them. That's kind of a big red flag for me. Now, some of you who are not as familiar with the Thomas and Friends range may notice that this item is called the Motorized Flying Scotsman, but I keep referring to it as Trackmaster. And the reason I keep referring to it as Trackmaster is because that's what I knew it as growing up. This line was originally the Trackmaster Revolution line, and before that, it was another line called Trackmaster. And Trackmaster was basically these plastic, motorized Thomas and Friends toys that took a wide variety of, you know, AA, AAA, C batteries, you know, and they ran around on this brown track. Now, before that, it was a Japanese, you know, toy line called Play Rail or Tomy or Motor and Rail, something like that. And that line had blue track. The rights to that toy were sold around 2007-ish for, you know, American and other companies, you know, to come in and do their own variation of it. That's how we got the Trackmaster range, and then we eventually got the Trackmaster Motorized, which is, you know, similar to this motorized engine we have right here, Flying Scotsman. So that's basically the reason I've been referring to this item as Trackmaster, even though it's really not. But I mean, it's all kind of the same, but at the same time, there's so many differences. Just to highlight some of the differences, right here, I have a Play Rail Gordon packaging. As you can see, we have the character right there. We have Thomas. Now, at Play Rail, they didn't put the other characters on the back, but they did have instructions on the back, and this whole blurb right here. Now, this is also very useful. I kind of wish they did that with, you know, the new motorized stuff, because just anything on the back with boring licensing info would have been so much better. And as you can see, you got a little bio about Gordon up there. We got a picture of Gordon and his express coach on the Tomy Blue track. This is a very good release. And another thing you might notice about this item is that the box is reusable. It has a little clip up here. It's a bit damaged because this is old, but you would be able to hang this item on store shelves, you know, because there was a little clip. And it's also good for just general storage as a collector or as a fan or as a kid. You can put your little item in there so that it doesn't get dusty and dirty. But with this Flying Scotsman, while the box is very nice, I have a feeling the box isn't reusable. Now, I'm going to try my best to unbox this with minimal damage to the box. And then we're going to do an in-hand look at the Flying Scotsman. We're going to compare it to another version of the Flying Scotsman. I'll talk more about the character and the origins of the real-life engine in a second. So here we have the Flying Scotsman. Now, something I'll tell you about the Flying Scotsman and these other new motorized items is that when we first got a glimpse of them, a lot of us were in the Thomas the Tank Engine fan community. We were very skeptical because, you know, they looked very big, they looked very disproportional. But now that I'm holding it in my hands, it's actually quite the quality item. Now, if we look at the Flying Scotsman engine itself, we see we have his face. Now, I'm not really sure how I feel about this face. As you can see, one of his eyes is a little squinted a bit. Now, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is reminiscent of the wooden railway version of this toy, which I have right here, which has a winking face. Now, the reason this version of Flying Scotsman has a winking face is because it is a misinterpretation of one of the illustrations in Tenders for Henry, the story where Flying Scotsman debuted in the Railway series. In this book, Henry can be seen in one of the final illustrations hauling 6 sludge tankers as part of the whole conflict. You'll find out about that if you check out the story, but pretty much this face on Flying Scotsman is a face that Henry's making, but Learning Curve seemed to have messed it all up somehow, and they confused that Henry face with a Flying Scotsman face, and they put it here on the Flying Scotsman, which is very interesting because there's at least 2 or 3 different illustrations of Flying Scotsman with a regular happy smiling face they could have used. I think this face is quite odd to use on him, but at the same time it does have quite a bit of character, I can't lie. And you know, it's kind of interesting how that little winking face on the wooden toy has carried over to the other iterations of this character. In fact, Flying Scotsman actually winks in the 2016 movie The Great Race, which is where Flying Scotsman officially debuted in the animated series. So many fans, including myself, think that might be a nod to the wooden railway toy, but you know, it's really up in the air about these sort of things. Tangent aside, as I was saying, us Thomas fans had concerns about these toys, you know, being disproportional, but now that I'm holding it in my hands and I'm really just like getting a feel of it, it doesn't really feel disproportional at all. Like, it looks really good in real life. It looks so much better in real life. I really like the side rods. I really like the shade of green. I love the false side rod right here because, you know, Flying Scotsman, he and Gordon are bigger engines, and bigger engines have more, you know, side rod action going on here. So I like that Mattel and the toy manufacturers represented it on this toy. And as you can see, we got the Flying Scotsman dome, his chimney. I believe his chimney is quite stretched out on this toy. I could be wrong. I don't believe it's like that on the official render or in real life. He's got his smoke deflectors on the side, his big face, his buffer beam, you know. His running board is simplified, as you can see in the CGI render, and in real life it dips twice, but here it only dips once. But that's fine, it doesn't really matter. And yeah, the engine overall, I have no complaints about it. Of course it is a bit, you know, how do you put it, vertically inclined, if you get what I'm trying to say, because Flying Scotsman's a very long engine, but here he's kind of, you know, a little bit short and stumpy, but I don't really mind. I think it fits this style, and I think the Tender engines are getting unnecessary hate, because, you know, once you hold it in real life, you can really tell it's a quality toy, and it's such a breath of fresh air after, you know, the last iteration of this range of the classic characters being so squished and disproportional and having the, let's be honest, some of the faces were pretty bad. And this Flying Scotsman face, while the expression is a bit questionable, I quite like the face mold itself. And the printing on the face is honestly pretty decent. I mean, I think it's a little bit lopsided, like it's kind of stretching over the side of the face. Mattel kind of has quality control problems when it comes to face printing, but you know, overall, it's really not that major in my opinion. Now, let's look at the tenders real quick. So, Flying Scotsman has a coal tender and a dedicated water tender. Now, the reason for this in real life and in the Thomas and Friends franchise is because, you know, during the time period where Flying Scotsman was being preserved, steam engines no longer ruled the railways. It was the diesel locomotives that were up and coming, so there wasn't much coal and water on the mainland, where Flying Scotsman works, you know, the United Kingdom. So we have to store extra water in order to make his round trips and do whatever he has to do on the railway. If we take a look at this coal tender, we can see that it has buffers at the front, it has buffers at the back, it has the little, I believe these are brakes, brake boxes, axle boxes, and he's got the little compartment for his regular water, because, you know, generally Flying Scotsman would be set up like this, with just the one tender. The second tender was really just for, like I said, backup, extra water. But generally, this is how he would look as a standard engine. I think the coal mold is really nice. The tender design is really good. Flying Scotsman actually did have an original Trackmaster Revolution item, and according to people on the internet, these tender molds are not the same ones that were on the original Flying Scotsman, which is quite fascinating to me, but I also appreciate that because, you know, they updated the mold so that it better fits this new iteration of the character. And as you can see, Flying Scotsman has his corridors back here. The corridors are basically how the driver and fireman access, you know, they walk through the tender and they're able to access the coach via the engine without having to stop or step out or whatever. And if you look at the dedicated water tender, it has a corridor as well, which I believe is a feature on the real-life Flying Scotsman water tender. Now, one thing I like about what they did with the new motorized stuff is that it has a false coupling right here. A lot of people don't like the false coupling, but I like it quite a bit because, you know, it's robust, you know, it can still have a degree of motion. And quick little tangent, but they also did that with the front coupling as well. It's now on a pivot. The old stuff did not have a pivot. It was just locked in straight up and down like this, but this has a pivot, which I like. But yeah, getting back to the false coupling right here, I like it quite a lot because, you know, it shortens the gap between engine and tender. One thing I don't like about this Flying Scotsman right here is how the coupling is so long, and I believe this is a carryover from the All Engines Go, because during the All Engines Go toys, they lengthened the couplings. I believe it was because the body shells were bigger, so, you know, they had to lengthen the coupling so that it could still stick out. I could be wrong on that. It could also just because, you know, they have so many crazy, you know, climb this hill, jump this bridge, sort of crazy, gimmicky stunt sets. Not really railway theme sets, but you know how it is with the All Engines Go. So I believe that's the reason they lengthened the coupling, but the problem with that is it leaves this, like, garish gap between engine and tender. I would have much rather they used, like, a standard coupling so that the gap would be, like, you know, right there. That looks natural. But since they didn't use a standard coupling, Flying Scotsman's tenders are all the way wrapped out here. It looks like he's, you know, detached from them, kind of like Henry in the story Fire Engine, or you know, the Scottish twins in the Missing Coach. But yeah, overall, looking at this version of Flying Scotsman, I really don't have many complaints apart from what I've already mentioned. Obviously, you know, it is quite vertically inclined. Like I said, he does tower over his tenders, which is bothersome to some people, but I personally don't really think it subtracts from the toy all that much. Obviously, I would have preferred if this was, you know, closer to the classic design of the Trackmaster range and was a bit shorter, but, you know, you get what you get. And honestly, for this art style, I really don't think that the toy manufacturers did a bad job. Now, just for a little bit of fun, let's have a blast from the past and compare this Flying Scotsman to a classic Flying Scotsman toy. Here we have the 2013 Wooden Railway Flying Scotsman, which was re-released in 2016 and originally came out in, I believe, 1993 or 1997, somewhere around there. The mold has pretty much stayed the same, apart from some minor modifications. But yeah, looking at these iterations of the character, you can see that this Flying Scotsman has sort of a brighter green shade, more akin to the book illustrations, while this Flying Scotsman has sort of a, I call this like a, I don't know, a minty sort of foresty green, akin to the CGI show, and, you know, certain other Flying Scotsman liveries and merchandise that the animators probably referenced. But yeah, it's very interesting to see the different portrayals of this character. As you can see, the Wooden Railway tried to capture Flying Scotsman's big wheels, while the Motorized toy tried to capture, you know, Flying Scotsman's general essence with the smoke deflectors and the 4472. Wooden Railway is more focused on general shape, while the Motorized is focused on getting the general attributes and core elements of the character, if that makes any sense. And if you want to compare the tenders, the Wooden Railway takes a simplistic approach to the corridor tender design, just makes them, you know, rectangular blocks, you know, very simple, very practical, while the Motorized takes a more detailed approach, similar to that of the CGI show. These toys are very reminiscent of the eras they came from, and there's a lot of pros and cons in both of them. I personally think, me and many people in the fandom think that this iteration of the Flying Scotsman While it is a classic design, it doesn't really do a good job at representing the character, because you got to bear in mind, Flying Scotsman is Gordon's brother, but Gordon does not look like this. He looks like this. So there's a lot of issues with this representation of the Flying Scotsman. I really don't know why they chose to make a whole new mold for him instead of just using Gordon or modified Gordon with these tender designs. But you know, it is what it is. Now, I do believe this is something worth bringing up, but if you look on this version of the Flying Scotsman, which is based on the CGI render, that's 4472 in the corner. Now, I do believe that Flying Scotsman in real life did carry his number on his cab at one point, but the interesting thing to note is, on the wooden railway iteration of this character, he has the British Rail logo, as you can see. British Railway right there. Well, actually, it says Mainland Railway on this, probably for copyright reasons. But yeah, you know, I kind of like the British Railway logo better because, you know, it adds more diversity to the design. You got the Flying Scotsman, the British Railway logo. You got the LNER 4472. Here, it's like, you got the Flying Scotsman 4472 LNER, and then you got 4472 again. You know, very interesting choice. And another thing I can point out about this Flying Scotsman in comparison to the CGI render is, I actually like the tenders on this toy better because the tenders on the toy have rectangular lining, while the CGI iteration of this character has sort of like Fowler tender style lining. I think it's because they based the CGI render off the Hornby model of the character, you know, the proper model train version of this Flying Scotsman. And that personally doesn't bother me that much, but it is kind of annoying. I would have preferred if they did the rectangular shaped lining just for some more unity and just to make the design flow more naturally. I would have even been okay if they did like an approach like this, have the edges chipped off and did that on the tender. I don't think the actual Flying Scotsman ever had that, but you know, it's just a little food for thought on ways they could have improved the actual Flying Scotsman CGI render. But like I said, this is a very good recapturing of how Flying Scotsman looks in the animated show, barring a few little things. And one thing I do want to point out is that the black on the running board stops at the wheel arch. And this is kind of interesting because in All Engines Go, the characters only have running board detailing on the front part and not the rest of them. So it's kind of interesting how this toy, while it's meant to be reminiscent of the classic design, has some sort of All Engines Go characteristics to it, which is kind of fascinating. I mean, this toy line has been All Engines Go for the past few years, so you know, that's kind of the reason why when they came back, they were increased in height, because the All Engines Go toys are increased in height kind of like this. They're not, you know, shorter down like the classic play rail items or Trackmaster were. Taking a break from looking at the Flying Scotsman himself for a minute, I want to take a look at this pamphlet that he came with. Now, I don't own any of the new Trackmaster, motorized toys, but so this is my first time looking at one of these pamphlets, and if I look at it right here, it appears to just be instructions, gobbledygook. You know, we got how to open the engine right here, then we have a bunch of stuff written in other languages. Again, I'm not really too crazy about this. I really would have preferred if they did this as like a, you know, collect all the characters sort of thing. I'll throw something up on screen. They used to pack these with the Trackmaster, motorized whatever items. They would pack these little pamphlets that encouraged you to collect the other characters and collect the sets and the 3-packs and build and craft your own island of Sodor world, just as vast and expansive as the real show. And this is the main problem with this new toy line and the Wooden Railway toy line I talked about in my previous video at the start of the summer. These toy train systems have a lot of holes in them. We have a good start, you know, a good foundation. We have the classic engine characters. Now let's do some rolling stock packs. Let's do some accessories, signals, animals, trees. Let's do some sheds. Let's get a Tidmouth Sheds action. We already got a Vicarstown, so let's get some Tidmouth Sheds, Brandon Docks, you know, Wellsworth action, some, you know, Thomas's Branch Line action. You know, these classic, even Blue Mountain Quarry or Ulstead Castle, something new. You know, let's get some of that action going. Let's get some sets, you know, build it all up, add the accessories, add the other characters, make a whole toy railway like we used to back in the old days, the good days, the proper toy train layout making days. We really need to get back to that with these toy train systems because, you know, toy trains are sort of a dying thing. You go into Walmart and Target and whatever, you don't see any classic wooden or motorized or little metal toy train systems, whether it be Thomas the Tank Engine or something else entirely. You just don't see that anymore. And we really need to bring that back, because that's just, children cannot miss out on this legendary hobby. And Mattel is really, really squandering the ball, because they have the potential, as you can see with this Flying Scotsman. It looks great. And of course, I can nitpick things all day, like the funnel and, you know, the paint, some of the paint work on it. But overall, as its own thing, not comparing it to anything else, it's solid. It's a solid foundation for improvement. And in a perfect world, we would have, you know, oddball characters like the Flying Scotsman, the entire main cast, you know, Thomas, Edward, Henry, Toby. We'd have them, we'd have the side characters like Salty and the Range. We could build up our own island of Sodor, but, you know, let's not talk about fantasy. Let's just focus on what we have right in front of us in reality. Now, as I was saying, the box is unfortunately not reusable. As you can see, we have some fake Trackmaster. I keep saying Trackmasters because I'm an old head, oh my goodness. We have some fake motorized track here at the bottom. We have a nice background, I will admit. But unfortunately, this box is not reusable. And the interesting thing about this background is it's actually very reminiscent of the old Owen Bell sort of Shining Time Station Ertl backgrounds you used to see on the little die-cast metal toys. Now granted, those boxes were not reusable either. However, they had character cards on the back. So there was still an incentive to collect the items, you know, an incentive to keep the boxes, you know what I mean? So I would really love if Mattel ups their game with the boxes like they did with the wooden railway system. The wooden railway system they had before they canceled it had really phenomenal, amazing boxes. Probably some of the best boxes in the history of American Thomas the Tank Engine merchandise. And that's a crazy take maybe to some people, but in my opinion, it's just the truth. They had the best boxes. They were reusable. You need reusable boxes because it's a great way to store your trains, take them on the go, and not worry about them getting excess damage or dust or whatever. Because, you know, when you're a kid playing with your toys, if you're anything like me, of course you're going to reenact crazy episodes. But you want your toys, you know, we want them to be safe. You're not going to be, you know, actively destroying them. That's why it's nice to have reusable boxes. Unfortunately, though, this box is not reusable. And if we have a look at the little display thing right here, I will admit, let's actually try and make this reusable. Does this work? Okay, you know what, this kind of works in a way. I mean, it's not really proper though, because, you know, it's still kind of exposed to the elements. There's no real closing off here. There's no like little plastic sheet like there is on the classic play rail or at older iterations of this line. But, you know, I suppose that's something. But yeah, the box, while it does look nice, it is kind of a disappointment because of the lack of extra characters on the back and also because of the lack of reusability. Now you just got some trash right here, you throw that out. You know, it is what it is. But let's actually open up this Flying Scotsman and take a look at the insides. Then we're going to modify it so that it's able to run on my blue track, because I don't own any classic Trackmaster track anymore, and I also don't own any Trackmaster Revolution track. And the thing about these newer engines that they made since 2014 is that the activation tab at the bottom hangs down really low, and because of that, it doesn't really run on the blue track that well. So we're going to open this guy up, we're going to take a look at the battery compartment, and then I'm going to modify him so that he can run on my Tomy blue track. Okay guys, I'm back. Let's open up this Flying Scotsman. As you can see, there's a lot of screws on the bottom. This screw keeps in the piston, this screw keeps in the false trailing wheels, and this screw is how you open up the engine. This is how you've opened up these items since 2014, so let's just go ahead, get my screwdriver in there, and let's crack open the Flying Scotsman. Okay, now as you can see, the on and off switch over here is very, very long. I mean, this is obviously reminiscent of the All Engines Go molds, which of course, as I've mentioned previously, had to be super long to account for the bigger shells. Now, one interesting thing I will say, which is a change from the previous iterations of this mold, is that the coupling is no longer at the back. Interesting thing though, the area where the coupling should be appears to still be there, even though it's now located on the train engine itself. As you can see, the little trailing wheels can be unscrewed and the coupling's right there. I might actually come in and swap this coupling out with a shorter coupling, or just keep it as is, we'll see. But yeah, this is the motor. It takes two AAA batteries, I believe is what they're called. small ones. Back in the day, you know, these trains, they took all sorts of batteries, you know. They used to take the AA's, and at one point, the big tender engines like Flying Scot over here, they used to take the C-size batteries, the big, really thick ones, and they were located in the tender mechanism, not in the engine itself. And, you know, that's a whole trip back in time. But I do understand the thought process behind standardizing the motors. Because here's the thing. Back in the day, when I was a kid, you had at least 3 or 4 different types of batteries to run all these engines. The battery companies definitely love Trackmaster, but I do understand, but I do understand the desire to standardize it all, because now all the trains take the same battery. It's a lot easier on the parents, and it's a lot easier on the kids. But here's the thing, while there is a lot of customization that you can do because all the motors are the same, you lose a lot of the character by, you know, compressing all the engines down to this specific size. Because with the old way they used to do things, engines had certain types of batteries based on the appearance of that engine. Some tender engines had the C-size batteries in the tender, or were tender driven, so that you could highlight the features of those characters. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. Here is a classic Tomy Emily, which is tender powered, and the battery was in the tender, and as such, we were able to have this feature on Emily, the big driving wheel. You couldn't have this big, you know, driving wheel feature otherwise if the locomotive was powered from the front with the same size battery as, say, Thomas. And by standardizing the design, you lose quite a bit of the character, because now Flying Scot over here, he is the same size as Thomas, which just is not true in real life or in the Thomas the Tank Engine lore of the show. But again, that's a whole trip back in time. I think in regards to this new toy line, while I do not really like how the different sizes of the engines are lost by the standardized motor design, I don't really have a problem with it as much in this new line, because they're all sort of chunky, they're all sort of chibi, if you could even call it that. So I really don't mind it in the new range. Although, you know, slimmer, more accurate designs reminiscent of the original Trackmaster would of course be appreciated. But again, I'm not against this new direction they're taking. I just wish that they would double down on it being a toy train system. Enough of the gimmick sets. Let's get in some, you know, Knapford Station, some Wellsworth, some Farquhar action. Let's get some Island of Sodor action going. Let's get some accessories, some trees, some animals, some cargo pieces. Let's just make proper Island of Sodor toys, and enough of these stunt sets that are trying to be like Hot Wheels and every other thing. But anyways, enough of my tangent. You have now seen the Flying Scotsman mechanism. You see the side rod detailing. You see the wheels. You see the little false wheel in the middle. You see the Flying Scotsman himself. This is what his other side looks like. And this is what the bottom of the tender looks like, in case any of you guys are curious. The wheels are all plastic. You know, back in the day, those used to have metal in the middle, and they would, you know, fall off the sides when you unscrewed it. But that's not here nor there. I believe the wheels have been made like this since 2013 or so. But you've seen the Flying Scotsman up close. You see me hold it. You see me yap about the old days. Let's get this guy on the layout and test him out. All right, guys. Hello. So I have modified the Flying Scotsman so that he is able to travel on my classic blue track. I filed down the activation tab. We got a classic Tomy Thomas going around right here. He'll be keeping the Flying Scotsman company. We're going to run him and a few other engines around, and then I'm going to run my Playrail Gordon so that we can have, you know, this classic sibling rivalry. Maybe we'll get some race action going. We'll see. But yeah, I'm going to run the Flying Scotsman as is, and then we'll play around with him and the other trains. So this is really a blast from the past, and bear in mind, this Flying Scotsman here was not designed to go on these tracks. So if you see him playing up, it's not his fault. You know, it's my fault for being a boomer and only owning the classic blue track. What can I say? You can't really improve upon the perfect design such as this. But enough about me being a Thomas Tank Engine boomer. Let's get the Flying Scotsman going. Couple up the tender right here. And off he goes. Okay, that was a lot of fun. Having the engines go about, giving Flying Scotsman his paces. Now let's have a fun little race between the Flying Scotsman and his brother Gordon, or little brother, as he somewhat affectionately calls him in the CGI show. And man, it is a blast from the past seeing a classic design like this paired up with a modern design. Although really, many would debate whether or not this is a classic design, because this is the Gordon that most Thomas and Friends fans grew up with. Putting this Gordon next to this Flying Scotsman just juxtapositions them even further. I mean, look at the scaling. They clearly weren't made with each other in mind, obviously, especially not this one. They're just decades apart, you know. Whole new, different generations of Thomas fans had this Gordon compared to this Flying Scotsman. But enough about a blast from the past. Let's have a good old-fashioned race between the Play-Rail Gordon and the new 2025 Motorized Flying Scotsman. Bear in mind, this race is definitely not fair because he was not made for these tracks, and he is a bit dusty and hasn't been run in quite a few, I don't even know, years maybe? Before we get into that, though, let me just do a comparison between their traction tires. In 2014, they changed the traction tires to being these like spiky things that I believe they're still made out of rubber, but they're much more durable. And hot take, but even though these look kind of silly, they're a bit better than these in some regards, because these classic Play-Rail and Trackmaster traction tires, if my camera will focus, have a tendency to melt in the heat, and they have flats, which affects how they run. So, like I said, you know, this Gordon right here is a bit dusty and it has the flat on it, and this guy was never designed for these tracks. So this race might be a little bit rigged, but hey, we're just here to have fun. So let's get them both going. Place your bets in the comments who's gonna win. I mean, it's kind of obvious. Well, maybe not. We'll see. I already know that Thomas, Annie, and Clarabelle have their bets on this race. Annie and Clarabelle, of course, going with Gordon, and Thomas, of course, going with the Flying Scotsman, just to rage bait Gordon. But without any further ado, let's just get right into it. And they're off. And here they come. Well, that was a totally fair and not rigged race. I guess they both won. Aww. Thomas probably lost a few pounds if he bet on that. Poor guy. But anyways, that's going to do it for today's video. I hope you guys liked looking at the classic Tomy trains running around, and I hope you guys liked taking a look at this 2025 Flying Scotsman. My overall thoughts on this range, if I'm just looking at the Flying Scotsman, is kind of similar to my thoughts on the Wooden Railway range I reviewed a few months ago. A lot of promise, a lot of detail, a big improvement from what we had previously, but will Mattel capitalize on it? Probably not, and that's the sad thing. I would really love if toy trains were to come back into the market, because they've been absent in this market for a really long time. And it breaks my heart a little bit as someone who grew up with toy trains, all sorts of toy trains, and just thinks it's such a fun and imaginative hobby that ties into the real world in such a beautiful way. Because, you know, you graduate from toy trains to the real thing, and then you learn about the real life train history around the world and then your very own backyard. So it does break my heart a bit to see the current state of the Thomas and Friends toy ranges and the general toy train sphere and you know, as a whole. But I would like to hope that the 2026 Thomas and Friends project, whatever it may be, will revitalize the franchise and bring more eyes to toy train systems, and maybe Mattel will step up their game, because at the end of the day, a lot of people have concluded that toy trains have mostly died because of the death of the Thomas the Tank Engine franchise, and the only way for them to really be resuscitated is for the Thomas the Tank Engine franchise to come back and for the toy train demand to skyrocket again. And I really cannot wait for the toy trains. And I really, really do hope with all my heart that toy trains do come back into fashion, because it's just such a fun, great hobby and such a beautiful pastime that's brought me so much happiness over the years. But like I said, that's going to do it for today's video. If you liked it, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Sound off in the comments what you think about the Flying Scotsman, what you think about Gordon, what you think about the classic blue track, what you think about this new track system and new engines that I was talking about in this video. Let me know your general thoughts on all of this. And as always, love you guys. Thank you so much for over 350 subscribers and over 2,500 total channel views and counting. I really, really do appreciate it. More stuff is to come, I absolutely promise you. And that's going to be all for today's video. Bye for now, and thank you so much for watching and all your support.
This was so cute. Oh my god, I love it so much. I kept smiling. I love it so much.